Joy Whisperer podcast, where we interview ordinary people living extraordinary lives. I am your host, Katy Rey, a fierce leader in the community, reminding you to live life to the fullest and embrace all that you are. Joining us today is the Kate Spurlock. You know, she's just saving lives every day. She is assistant state attorney for Special Victims Unit. Did I say it right?
You did.
Oh my gosh, wow. Wow,
Amazing.
That's it. That's the whole show. We can go now. It's great. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to be your first podcast.
Yes.
I mean, this is going down in history. Write it in your book when you write a book.
One day.
We will, for sure. Need to. Tell us what you do.
So I, like you said, am an assistant state attorney. So what that means is I prosecute cases, criminal cases, and I work in the Special Victims Unit. So the types of cases that we handle are aggravated child abuse, homicide with kid victims, child sex cases, victims under 12, human trafficking, and any online exploitation of kids.
Right? So here's a fun fact. As a child, middle school to high school, I watched loads of Law & Order. Special Victims Unit, Olivia Benson, you might know her. But I now have a really extreme anxiety because of those shows. Extreme. As a mom of 3 now. But after talking with Kate to give me like a view of the superheroes out there like herself, it gives me a little bit more, relief. I feel like that knowing that there are real people doing the work. It's not just a TV show. Because all the stories are like, this is based on a true event. And you're like, oh my gosh. But I also realize like there's people out there doing the work that we need to be done.
Amen.
And
absolutely.
I can't dig in the hole anymore. And, that was my fun fact. Marathons. I would watch remember when the marathons were on TNT or, shows, not apps? Watch them. And it was just like, I think I said something to you. I was like, white vans we were always scared of and this. And you're like, listen, someone just coming up and grabbing your kid from you, you had to be like, slow down, Katie.
Slim to none.
As someone who's experienced in this, and I was like, oh God, thank you. Why didn't I find you earlier? But what's something you can say? What's something you want to? Okay, she's going for circuit judge.
Yes, I'm also running for circuit court judge.
Hell yeah, she is.
6th Judicial Circuit. So if you live in Pasco or Pinellas Counties, you can vote for me.
Voted. What can you say to people is one of the biggest things that needs to be changed?
If my audience is like a parent of a kid,
different audiences, yeah.
I would say the monitoring of online. So I do free talks. I've done them all over at schools, churches, wherever someone will have me, because I really think it's important to educate parents. Our kids are just growing up in a different world. Mm-hmm. I'm in my mid-30s, and I grew up with no phones all through school until like high school. And so I didn't have the social pressures. I think it's not even just the sexual content online, also the bullying, the eating disorders. I'm meeting kids in elementary school with anxiety disorders because they're just so anxious. And as adults, we struggle with seeing things on social media and feeling like, man, how does she always afford the vacations? Their life looks so perfect, right? Because nobody ever posts their bad day online. Nobody ever says, hey, I can't pay my bill this month. So, at the end of the day, I say to really educate parents about what kind of apps your kids are using. And I kind of think of it as a sliding scale. So if you're allowing your elementary school kid to have a cell phone and have apps, that's a lot of supervision that's needed. They are young. And if you're thinking, well, I just don't think anybody would be talking to them, I promise you they are. Mm-hmm. And they're going to hear the sexual content somewhere. You should be setting the parameters and checking it. And obviously, as your kids get older to almost being 18, that looks different. That's a little bit more of a trust and verify versus monitoring all the time. I always say too, if your kids have an app, you should also have an app, that same app, and you should be on it. You should be friends with your kids. You should see what people are posting. Mm-hmm. I get it. You don't really care about Snapchat, but if you're letting your kid have Snapchat, you should know how it works so you can monitor it and see it.
So a lot of cases that you see come through it's technology.
It's kind of twofold. So I would say my internet crime cases obviously require a lot of the apps. And then I have like hands-on offending, which is like the sexual battery, lewd and lascivious molestation. Those cases actually probably, I don't know if I have an actual statistic, but I would probably ballpark it 75% or more are someone that's known to the child. Like it's a family member, it's a trusted family friend. Those hands-on offenses, the onlines are almost all strangers.
Yeah.
So they're kind of in two different worlds. So what I also think too is that online, it's like you would never just drop your kid off at a park and come back 6 hours later and just pick them up and hope that nobody had abducted them or no one had approached them, right? But when you do that, when you drop them off online after school and you just let them sit unattended, that is what you're doing.
Example. I know the education and awareness is so real.
It is, because people don't think about it because they're like, well, they're in my house, right? My kid's right upstairs, so they're safe.
No.
But the predators, they're not at the parks anymore in the white van, like you said.
Yeah, I know.
They live online. We just had a defendant who said, I wasn't really sure. Like, in essence, I was trying to find a kid. And when the sheriff's office put out a list of the apps for parents to be on the lookout for, those are the apps he went and created profiles with, because he's like, that's what the kids are on.
And no, the parents aren't watching them.
Correct.
He even said that. Thank you for the information.
Yeah, thanks, Sheriff. I didn't even realize all those apps existed, but now I'm on there. And I can list there's Kik, there's Discord, there's Snapchat. Those are big ones. Instagram, I've had several. Facebook. And there's honestly, WhatsApp, Text Now. All of those are rampant.
And that's crazy too, because you think, I always try to tell my kids, watch out for images and things, or tricky adults, people asking them for help because they're a kid, and that should never happen. But how often are they by themselves? I mean, also
but
that, but I have to pour, and I feel like I'm creating anxiety, but I'm also no, I gotta do it. You gotta have the convo, right?
You do. I mean, I do it with my son's 4, and we already do the good touches, bad touches. Oh, yeah. We also don't do secrets in our house.
Yeah,
we do surprises. Surprises have an end date. And secrets don't, know, and so I just like to foster that. And I think it's a continual conversation, and it grows as your kids age, right? The conversations to a kindergarten kid are very much like, you need to verify with mom first, I'm your world kind of thing.
Yeah,
and as they get older, it's like you don't want weird kids either.
Yeah.
So you're trying to balance them of But it takes a lot of oversight, and it also takes a lot of good positive reinforcing. Hey, I really appreciate you bringing that to me, and I'll take care of it. And a lot of predators use intimidation or threats about, you're going to be in trouble, I'm going to embarrass you to your family, your church, your school. And, we do sextortion is a crime that's kind of on the rise, and that's where someone thinks they're dating somebody online. They might send a nude photo, and then it switches to, hey, if you don't keep sending me more, I'm going to post this on your school's website. I'm going to post this to all your friends. I'm going to send this to your parents. And they'll say, oh, your parents are Tim and Sue, and you guys live at this address. You go to this school, you go to this church. And they're like, they know me. And what kids don't realize is a lot of the photos that they send out have metadata attached to them that have the IP addresses and other information. So they just drop in the IP address and realize, oh, you took the picture in your bedroom. Here's the IP address link to your house, right? And they can geolocate. If you ever get in your car on a Monday morning and it tells you the route to work, it's because your phone is always pinging with the towers of a GPS. So it's logging those coordinates, and it knows your most predictable path. So it's kind of the same thing when you take photos, you're giving that data away. There's ways to turn those settings off, but kids don't know that. So to them, it's this guy, he's watching me, right? I had a case, and the girl was in Palm Harbor, and she felt like he was
always there.
It turned out he lived in Sevierville, Tennessee, and had a family, and we're prosecuting him currently for the sextortion. But
is that a new one, sextortion?
Sextortion, yes.
We have to create it because all this crazy stuff is happening. Oh my!
The first time I heard it, I was in law school. I interned with the Feds, U.S. Attorney's Office in Jacksonville.
Feds.
Yeah, the Feds.
Listen, that's more my slang,
and it was great. I mean, it was cool. It was actually the largest extortion case in the country at the time. There were 2 co-defendants and over 150 victims. The FBI had to create an entire task force to try and identify these kids. And so it was huge because if I remember, like 1 or 2 had committed suicide by the time we found these kids and identified them. Some still are not identified. And so it's an overwhelming anxiety. And I always tell parents, they're like, well, how do you, I'm like, first of all, you engage, you're having the conversations with your kids on a continual-ish basis, but you also know your kid when they're different. Like, I don't know, your daughter loves cheer and all of a sudden she doesn't want to cheer anymore.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to do this or that anymore. She wants to just sit in her room and she's withdrawn.
We're as sick as the secrets we carry.
Yeah.
There's a saying I
love that.
You're as sick as the secrets that you carry.
And those are heavy for young kids.
Yeah,
and so when you know that they're acting
compartmentalize.
different, like that's a time. And listen, if they're not going to open up to you, don't take it personally. Get them in touch with someone who they will open up with. Hey, listen, I get it. You don't probably want to tell me what's going on. I'd like to set up maybe a counseling, maybe meet with somebody and you can let them know, right? I just think that you know your kid and you know when things are off. And like you said.
Starts in the home, right?
It does. It's really just that simple.
We're getting Kate to tell all the parents out there. You know, parents get, I always like to say, like, what are you so scared of? Just being human in front of your kids? I'm not going to talk about that. And you're like, what? I always call it breaking cycles, and my family laughs at me. They're like, okay, Katie, # breaking cycles. But it wasn't that my parents, if I brought it up, but they just never, like, we didn't go out of our way. My spouse's parents did not talk about it. And you're just like, okay. Like,
you're so profound in that because that is what it is. It's like,
open up.
Yes. Be human. Your kids will figure out soon enough that you're just human, right?
We say our body parts correctly. We joke. And when they hear slang words, they're like, what does that word mean, Mom? And I'm like, well, it could be someone you hate or the name for Richard or your body, you know, like, and I go through it. And I'm just like, you have to be real to them. And even if you're an introvert and you hate like talking in front of people, it's your child. Like, let's figure this out.
Well, I mean, I once gave a presentation and a mom said to me, I feel like it's too young to talk to my elementary school kid about this stuff.
Elementary.
And I said, that's perfectly fine. Then they're also too young to have access to the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Point blank. If you are so worried to have the conversation about the content doesn't go away online. You're just exposing them to it with no skill set. You're throwing them into the water with no life jacket. And so if you're not comfortable, okay. But I also would suggest don't have a phone. They don't have a phone and they don't have apps and they don't have social media. And, you know, when they're in the 2nd, 3rd grade, you can kind of wrangle that, right? But I think if you're not having the conversation, somebody else is. And I would rather my kids hear it from me. I would rather they know the truth and they can trust me. And I got asked one time too, like, well, I don't want to be so soft that they think it's okay to, you know, send nudes and do this. So I kind of do the tough approach and I said, right, but would you want your kid upstairs thinking about taking their life because they're so ashamed that you're going to find out that they made one mistake, right? There is like a balance in that. It's the same adage. I don't know, like, you know, my parents used to always say, like, you know, never drink and drive, never do that. But if you find yourself in a bad set of circumstances, call me, right? Like, I don't want you to do it to begin with, but if you make a mistake, which we all do, different levels and different types of mistakes, I want to be the soft place for him to land, and I wanted my son to know, like, I'll move mountain and earth to protect him, you know?
I love that. And as, you know, do you get like, I feel like you're just so passionate about this. You know, people are like, how do you go home or how do you do that? Do you feel the impact you're making that, you know, like, I'm a superhero, so you get home and you're like, and your husband's like, please don't bring up a story today at a dinner party. And you're like, listen to this, you know? But it's like, I feel like when I talk about the foster kids and stuff like that, like, it's just this thing inside me that makes me super sad, but it's also like, I'm going to make a difference. So is that how you keep
yes, I will say, like, I do feel a very much directed purpose. I know that I have the access, capability, and willpower and strength to save these kids' lives and to be a
badass.
Really a pivotal moment in their life. I think a lot of my victims just don't see strong women in their lives. They don't see strong direction in their lives. And so sometimes it takes somebody in a, quote, position or title that seems important to say, man, you're so valuable. You have such worth. I see such worth in you, right? Like I see it in you and I'll do anything to help you. I'm a big believer about not just doing my job in the prosecution of the case, but if at the end of the case the victim isn't okay, what are we really doing? What is the real purpose of this, right? Like just punishing the bad person for what they've done doesn't negate, like the ripples run deep in this victim's life. And if we're not actually giving them the tools to, in essence, overcome and become empowered by it, bad things happen, but you can still use that for such a good purpose and such good in your life. And so for me, that's a huge thing. But some days are hard, right? And I do think I have a good separation, good balance of it. But my husband definitely hates to hear any stories about, he said my job used to be funny and fun stories and now it's just sad and he doesn't want to hear about kids.
Right, but that's awareness. I mean, he hears it every day. We don't hear it every day. But so you have just been like a topic for me and for like, of course I have all your magnets and stuff too all over my refrigerator. But I've just talked about your story so often, like some of the victims and like things they go through, and knowing that some of these kids are foster kids and vulnerable, but people are not aware. No. And we just allow people to shut it down and not know the crazy, real horrible stuff happening out there. And you're front and center with it. I mean, one of the things I tell people is you always go like biggest, like 60 years by. You give the like, what do you call them? Defendants.
Yeah.
Perps.
Sex offenders.
Yeah. Whatever the
Sometimes, chomo.
Stop, I'm done. Other names that we will not bring up today. Yes. But, and I tell them, but we have Kate and her superhero team, like, going out there. And it's actually, as sad as it is hearing the stories, it actually gives me like a sense of relief knowing that there's so many people helping these kids.
I mean, I will say I just met with my boss, the state attorney, this week, and we were really just like kind of in this dialogue of like, how do we better support? Because in our unit, some of my victims, like, and you know this from foster care, they have no one else. There are a number living in a group home. No one knows when they go missing. Years ago, I tried a human trafficking case of 2 runaway foster kids that had been gone from foster care for over a month. And the guy that I tried the case with, his name's Paul, in his closing argument, he said, like, the law was written, like, specifically for these kids, right? Because no one was looking for them. They weren't missing from the private school. They weren't on your Amber Alert. They weren't on the back of the milk carton. They weren't on your nightly news. Yet they had been missing for weeks, and no one knew where these kids were. So, and I felt that like in my bones. I was like, these children are on the street and no one is looking for them. All that happens is a bolo beyond the lookout gets sent to local law enforcement with the kid's picture in case they come in contact with them. But no one's kicking in doors and going. And that case came about from a housekeeping lady in a motel in South St. Pete who just saw something. She saw men coming in and out of a room, saw these young looking girls in that room. And she was like, absolutely not, called it in. But, our human trafficking cases, I get asked that a lot. Like, oh, like, I don't want my kid to go alone to Target. I think they're going to get abducted, from the parking lot of Target. Not to say that wouldn't happen or can't happen, but it's mostly our foster care kids. They're so vulnerable. And the idea, listen, even the tiniest things seem huge to them because they have no one to love them. So it's like intoxicating to be loved and desired and to be told you're important.
The consistency, right?
Yep. And those 2 girls in the motel, one of them didn't even want to cooperate in the prosecution. She did not feel like she was a victim because she was getting Domino's pizza and a roof over her head. And she felt like everybody's got to work. I'm like.
And these are the stories people need to hear.
She's 13 years old.
Yeah. Like this is, what are we doing?
Correct.
Right?
But how much has happened in that 13-year-old's life that they don't even feel worthy to be a victim of a crime because they were at least getting a Domino's pizza and a crappy motel room to live in.
This is what I need and this is my value.
Correct.
So I have ideas for another conversation for your meeting you had the other day for these children. It just like popped in my head. Universe. So what's some of the things? So if I met you on the street, I love this question. I ask all my guests this. If we just like bumped into each other, which of course we become fast friends. Yeah. But if we bumped into each other and I was like, who are you? Who are you?
Who is Kate? Kate is first a mom, a wife, a Christian, but I find a really deep purpose in helping others. I learned that about myself years ago. I had a job I hated, and I learned if I don't have something of service bigger than myself, I don't really feel fulfilled. And I think that where I am now in my life, I love the platform to help. It's not just, people always think it's about the prison and the big numbers and the trials, which I do love trial and I love all of those things, but it's looking a kid in the face and telling them like, hey, I see you. I see you, and you're so worthy and you're so valued. And I mean it with every bit of who I am. And there's just a real gift in that, and it fills me. So for me, that's who I am. I think of myself as really just a servant to help do in a really messed up world, to be a little bit of salt and light.
I love it because servant leaders just look so different, right? When you're really serving from the heart, and yours is just like super intelligent badassery. You walk out of a courtroom and you're like, gotcha. I hope you do that often, or drop a mic or do something. But I know there's those hard days, right? Where you're like, what did I just, like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But do you get to stay in contact with your victims? Do you have like stories where you're just like, wow, they did get seen, loved, and heard, and here's like an example? Like, do you have those?
Yeah, I do. I actually stay in contact with quite a bit of my victims and check in.
Survivors, we'll say.
Yes. And they all look different, and you have to be okay with success looking different for each one of them.
Yeah.
But one of my girls that was a human trafficking victim, she just reached out because she wants to go to school. So I wrote a letter to help her get into. She wanted to go to cosmetology school. She has a little child on the way, or she just had him. He's a little boy, and seeing her pick herself up, she's really had no guidance in her life. And at the time that this happened, she was living in a shelter in high school when she was trafficked. And so she said to me, I want more for my own child than what I had, and she's willing to work for it. And at the time, she thought it was fast, quick money. She didn't realize the damage and how little she was selling herself. She was selling herself for $100 to do some of the most vile things. And her story, her case actually prompted a state representative to take a bill, which they've now are put through for limiting social media for kids under the age of 16. And they're holding these social media companies accountable for young kids having accounts because that's really needed. These parental control automatically set on kids' profiles. But so she was great. She's doing well. I have another one that moved out of the area. We stay in contact. She reaches out quite often. And she's really blossomed. She ended up kind of nannying for a family, and she's really kind of stepping into her own and growing herself, her self-worth. I love that for her. It really does. I just had one actually email me, and her case was unique. She reported it when she was 11 years old that her mom's boyfriend had been molesting her, having sex with her and everything. And it was referred to the sheriff's office, and they honestly, I don't even know how it happened, but they just left the case pending for 20 years. So 20 years later, they find that this case never got closed out. It never, they were supposed to go interview the suspect. He'd fled to Indiana, and then it just sat. So when they brought it to me, they thought, well, clearly no one's going to do anything 20 years later. There's no statute of limitations on child sex cases under 12 or murder. So I met with her, and she had the same recollection that she had when she was 11 years old, which to me was so powerful because if you had a motive to lie back then, I think that's kind of gone 20 years later.
Yeah.
Right? She's a mom of 3 kids.
You're like, oh,
and
what was happening? Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't super fun to start opening back up about this and it forced her to go into foster care. She had a really tough life and struggled with drug addiction off and on for several years. We ended up getting through the case. By the time we prosecuted him, I think he was older, and he was he ended up pleading guilty and going to prison and all of that. And she sent me an email out of the blue and just said, I've been thinking about you a lot. I want you to know what you do and what your unit does is like so important. And you gave me back my life. I have such peace. I have peace as a mom. I have peace as a person. For the first time in my life, I just feel at peace. And for her, it was 20 years of being called a liar. Mm-hmm. It was a real weight off of her, even though it took us, unfortunately, that many years to get that for her. It was a tough case. And I told her it's tough, but I believe in you. And I know that this happened and we have to try.
Yeah.
And so that was like a full circle. So yeah, you know, she just out of the blue said,
what you're doing matters.
Yeah.
It changes people's lives.
You know, I had a rough week that week and I said, man, I really needed that. And she said, stay strong because the next kid needs you.
Oh, yeah.
And I said,
Kate.
thank you. Yeah, like that's big. I love those moments.
I almost cried and then I got chills again. I don't know why I shave my legs when I'm with Kate. I'm never going to shave my legs again. There's no point. I always get goosebumps listening to this story. Like, Okay, so when you become judge, how does that change for you? Like, what does the day look like?
So I'm not necessarily as a judge an advocate for a particular victim. I think a judge's role, like let's say criminally, say I'm a criminal judge, circuit court judge. I think you can allow as a judge a safe space for victims and defendants to be heard. Mm-hmm. Like everyone needs a place. Yeah. And you have to be a good referee. You're a little more neutral in that sense. Mm-hmm. But where I see myself is still digging into the community partnership outside of just a courtroom. I think it's important when you have their titles. I don't think the titles really define the person or are that, but I think you have to be cognizant that if you have something that people look up to, right? Like you're a judge, you should be digging into helping these girls look at themselves and go, man, this judge sees value in me. This person cares enough to take their time after work to invest in me. I don't ever foresee that I'll never not be helping our kids feel valued. Yeah. That's important. It's what we all need.
And you're educating the adults to know what's safe for our kids. Everybody, not just parents, just like understanding, say something, see something, say something. Yep. Okay, so where can we find you and when do we vote?
So voting is August 20th of this year, 2024. If you're Pinellas or Pasco, you can do it by absentee ballot. You could do it by voting on the day of August 20th. So where you can find me at, Vote Spurlock, VOTE. SPURLOCK at, well, no, it's .com. I was like, we do have an email address.
You're like, wait a second. We're doing a website. I teach on technology. Here we are.
Yeah, we do have an email address that's votespurlock@gmail, but you want to go to votespurlock.com. Okay. And you can learn about me and who I am and what I do. And I would love to connect. There's also my contact information, and you can send a message on the website. If you think, hey, I might have a great speaking opportunity or a women's group or, my church after church meets or my kids' school, let me know. I'm really passionate about educating parents so that I can, honestly, I'd like to put myself out of business of having kids to talk to.
I would love that.
So
I would also love that. But you can find Kate on Not a Great Whisperer podcast, KatyRey.com. You are a superhero. I am so glad we're friends. I adore you and appreciate everything you do for our community.
Thank you. You bless this community as well.
No way, girl. It's you. Bye.